and Anne, and
Yeah.
I'm sure Shana Leah is on, and Jessica's on, and Judy's on. So today, this week, we're reading the portion of Bahar and Bechukotai.
Amen.
First, happy Lag BaOmer. Today is Lag BaOmer, and it's a beautiful day, and I was able to take a shave, so I feel so much better. There are some people who follow the custom of not shaving for 33 days, and the only reason for me why that's doable is I make sure that right in the middle, thank God, is Israel's Independence Day on the 5th day of Iyar, which falls generally between the 18th and the 20th day of the Omer. And I make sure on Israel's Independence Day to say the mourning period is suspended, take a shave, get a haircut. It's a wonderful moment when we're seeing days of sadness turning into days of joy. And, and I hope that continues. Let it continue, and Israel should remain strong. I was very, very taken aback by, thank God, Bauman is no longer our congressman. We're represented by Congressman Richard Torres, whom I affectionately have renamed Richie Torah, but Richie Torres is the real deal. But Bauman, he still represents north of the city line and Scarsdale, Yonkers, and a good chunk of the Bronx. And he follows in step with Talib. And as you may have heard, Talib has introduced and is pushing a celebration of what they call Nakba Day, the day of the catastrophe on May 15th in Congress. And Bauman is right there with her. And Bauman was one of the 19 who voted against, he voted against a resolution signed by over 400 members of Congress applauding the Abraham Accords. And even that he voted against. And our grandson, Eitan, wrote a wonderful piece that appeared in Newsweek. It just is impossible to understand. How could you vote against the Abraham Accords? But I must say that I often get things wrong, but my assessment of Bauman was correct. And going all the way back when I wrote that letter, and he responded. And as a matter of fact, apparently Obama got involved because Obama liked his response to me, which of course he didn't write. I didn't care for his response at all. I felt he did not respond to what I was challenging him about, but I never did meet him. I just felt that he wasn't honest, and I took the stand that I wasn't going to sit and talk with him. And I know of many people who did talk with him who have regrets. Many of the leaders in our community whom you may know. I just felt that anyone who sat with him on Israel was being used by him. How did I get to this discussion? Because of the way now he is celebrating the Nakba Day, which is really so very, very painful. It's such a misreading of history. It's a simplistic reading of what evolved. But going all the way back, Lag BaOmer is a day, and Chag HaAtzmaut is a day. In the midst of the mourning, we have the power to turn mourning into dancing. Literally turn the mourning into dancing, a sentence that we say every morning in Psalm chapter 30. So today is Lag BaOmer, and it's a wonderful day. And I want to encourage you to read Rabbi Ezra, Yedidi Ezra's thoughts on Lag BaOmer, which is on the Bayit page. As usual, he's such a wonderful neshama, wonderful writer. And what he said is, it's nice to have a day when we identify ourselves as Jews, not by those who are attacking us. Our fight against anti-Semitism, but by the joy and the celebration of being Jewish. But today I want to not deal with what we're going to be reading this week in synagogue, Bahar B'chukotai, but I want to deal with a very famous line from the portion of the week which we read just the other day, this past Shabbat, from the portion of Emor. I wanted to encourage you. This is the Steinsaltz Bible. I'm so impressed by this work. And I want to encourage you, for those who can, to pick it up. It's wonderful. If every day one reads a little snip of the portion of the week, it can expand the mind, and this is done very well. And it's in the middle of this portion, if we can bring it up on my wonderful Shuli, chapter 24 in Leviticus, sentence 20, where we have one of the most famous dictums in the Torah, where it says, ayin tachat ayin, where it says, the ish ki yitain mum ba'amito. And I love the translations. The translation is the following: the ish ki yitain mum ba'amito. If a man...
Sorry, Rabbi, which parak, which pasuk?
Leviticus chapter 24, sentence 20. I'm just reading the previous sentence too. If a person wounds and inflicts a defect on his counterpart, as he or she did, so shall be done to him or her. And then it says in sentence 20, shever tachat shever, a break for a break. Ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye. Shein tachat shein, a tooth for a tooth. And then it says, kashe yitain mum ba'adam ken yaten bo, which means, as he or she inflicted a defect on the person, so shall be inflicted on her or on him. This is the punishment. You can see it here. Sheva tachat sheva. If I fractured your arm, that's what I get. Ayin tachat ayin, eye for an eye. Shein tachat shein, tooth for a tooth. If I can face everyone, surely. Now, very often our Torah is referred to as, certainly in the larger, more fundamentalist Christian community, our Torah is referred to as a Torah of wrath, as a Torah of anger. That's the Old Testament. And as I've mentioned many, many times in the world of scholarship, and in fairness, I don't think our Testament should be called the Old Testament. If it's old, it means that its primary usage is it's the precursor for the new. And you can pick up any Gideon Bible and you'll see, if you read, quote unquote, the New Testament, they'll have in the margin how it comes from our Torah. For example, when it discusses the death of Jesus, it'll refer us back to chapter 12 in Exodus, which deals with the Paschal, with the slaughtering of the Paschal lamb. What the Paschal lamb has to do with Jesus and the death of Jesus, it's really a very, very, very long stretch. But in the larger world, our Torah, by the way, let me just finish that thought. I think a more appropriate way to refer to our Bible is it's the Jewish Bible. And then there is the Christian Bible. And then there is the Muslim Bible, the Bible of Islam. There is the Quran. Now, in our Bible is understood by many in the world as that speaks about the God of anger, the God of wrath, the God who is the God who relentlessly punishes and exaggerates punishment, and on and on and on. While the Christian Bible is viewed, that's the new covenant, that's the covenant of love. And I'm not putting down, God forbid, the Christian Bible. It's wonderful that people believe in the Bible, and thank God we applaud people, whatever they believe in, as long as what they believe in is not preaching, behavior that is a behavior of murder and a behavior which is unethical. I actually very much ally myself with an understanding of idolatry as not being so much theological, but behavioral. That's the position of the Meiri. The idea that idolatry has something to do with theology, that's Maimonidean. But the Meiri, who lived around the time of Maimonides, almost 1,000 years ago, is gaining traction, that it's behavioral, that if there are Gentiles who have other understandings of God, as long as it's an understanding that believes in the fundamental principles of ethics, vivakasha, that's something that Jews, for Christians or for Muslims, would very much support. But coming back, I'm off on a tangent here. Eye for an eye, when one thinks about it, that is the phrase. That's sort of like the phrase that people pick up on. That's what the Jewish Bible is about. It's about lex talionis. I think that's what it's in the Latin, I believe. I don't know Latin, but it just kind of pops into my head from what I read years ago. That's physical compensation. I take out your eye. That's what the Bible is all about. And the message, when one reads the text, seems to be clear that the punishment for one who takes out the eye of a neighbor is that her or his eye is taken out. Now here, I want to move into the next realm, and I'll speak for a few moments, maybe more than a few moments, maybe 5-10 minutes, and then I want to open it up, because today's session is very important in that I think it yields a broader understanding of how our Torah talks. If one looks into the oral law, into the Talmud, and the oral law is full of differences of opinion, but on this issue, the Talmud, in a tractate called Baba Kama. Baba Kama is the first of the Babas. Baba really means gate. Baba Kama is the first gate, Baba Metzia, the middle gate, Baba Batra, the last gate. It would take, if you're learning the folio every day, the daf every day, it would take a whole year to finish all three of them, and more than a year, maybe a year and a half. So in the oral law, in its explication of eye for an eye, I believe it's in Baba Kama 84a, the Talmud has only one opinion about the meaning of eye for an eye. It says no, it is not physical compensation. That is not what the Bible means. Rather, it's monetary compensation. And to support its position, it says, let's prove that it cannot be physical compensation. And when the oral tradition speaks, it sometimes offers arguments that are not very complicated. And you've heard me say this often. I like simple, certainly as I get older, and I don't think simple is simplistic. Simple can be profound. If I can't say it in a simple way, something's wrong. And the Talmud offers two rationales as to why it couldn't be physical compensation. Because the Talmud basically argues that if it is physical compensation, it may be impossible to carry out equal justice through a physical penalty. And it offers two examples. One example is offered by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. That's the anniversary of death that we're celebrating on Lag BaOmer. He said, look, if a blind person damaged the sight of another, how would she or he be able to give up an eye for an eye? It's an interesting argument. It says eye for an eye. Suppose a person, God forbid, has no sight. What kind of eye for an eye? There won't be due compensation if it's physical. And then there's another school of thought called the school of Chizkiah adds that it sometimes can happen, and certainly thousands of years this could have happened ago, that more than an eye would be taken out as punishment. More than the eye of the perpetrator would be taken out if taking an eye from the assailant causes death. I guess it could be done more precisely today with the advances of medicine, but certainly then if you take out an eye, maybe a person's life could be entirely lost. And the Talmud pounds away on this point and says, not only is there no physical compensation for eye for an eye, and it's not that we as the rabbis are altering what the written text said. No, what they're saying is that that written text, when our Bible says eye for an eye, it never meant physical compensation. It always meant monetary compensation. So that's my first point that I want to put out there. The first point that I want to put out there is that even though eye for an eye is understood as being what, quote unquote, using the wrong term, the Old Testament is all about, it's the God who is full of fury, who says, if you take out somebody's eye, your eye is going to be taken out. The Talmud says, no, that's not what it is. And it proves its point. And it says it never was that way. It's always monetary compensation. Which leads me to my second point. Well, if eye for an eye is monetary, why doesn't the Torah say so? The Torah doesn't articulate this position in clear terms. One wonders why, if eye for an eye is monetary, the Torah doesn't articulate this metaphorical reading clearly. Why not? And it is here that I wish to introduce a general understanding of how law is given in the written Torah, in the Pentateuch, in the 5 books of Moses. Of course, the 5 books of Moses has narrative. It has a whole position on temple law and purity, which is very, very far from contemporary times. But it has jurisprudence, which deals with interpersonal relationships. It deals with torts. It deals with damages. So I want to suggest the following. The written law is the written law. It was written, but for many people, the written law is only heard. People come to synagogue. There was a time we didn't even have Bibles. So people would hear the Torah being read from the Sefer Torah, from the Torah scroll, but they would just listen to it. They didn't even have a book in front of them to follow. So what we're suggesting is that when the written law presents a law, it is presenting a general teaching. It presents an idea to give us a deeper understanding of what's occurred. And what I think the Torah is saying is the following. It wants the listener to hear the words eye for an eye, to conclude that removing the eye of someone else is a crime which is so heinous that it is deserving of my eye to be taken out. It's deserving of my eye to be taken out. That's what I deserve. In fact, there was an 18th century commentary, Rabbi Yaakov Tzvi Mecklenburg, who wrote Haktava Kabbalah. He wrote about these issues of how we are to understand the written text. And I'm quoting, he says, the Torah mentions an eye for an eye only what punishment the perpetrator of bodily injuries deserves. Deserves, not receives. As a matter of fact, I just saw in the Steinsaltz, I'm going to read to you the translation of the Steinsaltz of the sentence. He writes, a break for a break, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. As she or he inflicted a defect on the person, so shall be inflicted on him. This is the punishment that he deserves. That's what the written law is saying. The oral law, which interprets the Torah, has a very different mission. It explains how the rules are actually practiced. How are they practiced in real life? While one who removes the eye of another may deserve physical punishment, in practical terms, he or she receives a monetary penalty. As a matter of fact, my teacher, Nechama Leibovitz, notes that the text says, ayin tachat and tachat ayin. And Nechama, of blessed memory, she wonders, what does the word tachat? And what she says is, even though we translate the word tachat for ayin tachat ayin, an eye for an eye, well, then the Hebrew would have been different. It should have been ayin b'shvil ayin or something like that. That's not what it says. It says ayin tachat ayin. The term tachat, usually translated as far, actually means instead of, in place of the eye, something different is substituted. And what is that? That is money. And this is a principle, the way the oral and the written law interface is a principle that applies to many of the laws in the written Torah. I'll give you probably the best example. Read the Torah, and the Torah over 30 times, you can Google it, as I remember, it's 36 or 37 times, that the Torah says that if I do this, it is a capital offense, that the punishment is death, literally put to death, 36 times. Amongst them, for example, Mikalel Aviv V'imo. If I curse my parents, Mot Yumat, put him to death, put her to death. Makei Aviv V'imo. If I hit a parent, Mot Yumat. Over and over and over. That's what it says. Now, it's nothing to write home about if a person curses her or his parents. Absolutely not. But let's go slow. Death, the death penalty, and the Talmud in Tractate Sanhedrin, it's a big tractate. The beginning of Makot begins to work this through and says, you know, there are limits to the death penalty. I'll give you an example. The most obvious death penalty, which is very common here in America, is if I murder someone, I should be murdered. I know people have different feelings about capital punishment. So the Torah says, the Talmud says, let's assume that A is running after B, has a knife, let's say, in his hands, and runs into a cave. The cave has only one door, and the way you go in is the way you go out. In other words, once you're in there, there's no other way to come out except through the front door. The egress is the regress. And A is running after B. B runs into the cave. A's got the knife in his hands, goes inside, and two witnesses see how A has run after B and comes out with a knife dripping with blood. And then they go into the cave and they see that B has been murdered. Says the Talmud, that is not enough for capital punishment. Not enough. As a matter of fact, there has to be a warning from two witnesses, and the warning has to be precise what kind of death penalty it is. Until the Talmud gets to the point where the Talmud says, this is almost an impossibility. And so in the 10th Mishnah in Makot of the first chapter, there was one rabbi who says, and by the way, capital offenses has to come in front of a very select large court of 23, not just a judge, it has to be 23 judges. So the Talmud says, one person says, if a court puts to death one person in 70 years, that is considered a killer court. And then Rabbi Akiva famously says, you know, if I was the head of the Sanhedrin, no one would be put to death. No one whatsoever. So the concept that I shared with you in distinguishing the written and oral law may explain this difference between the Torah that mentions so many times that there is capital punishment and the oral law that says no. On many occasions, I know I'm reading from Loving Torat, Ahavah. On many occasions, such as cursing one's parents, the Torah declares that the perpetrator shall die. Yet the oral law cites opinions that capital punishment was hardly, if ever, carried out. The Torah, once again, is telling us about what the perpetrator deserves, because one could ask, okay, if the Torah doesn't mean capital punishment, why does it say mochumat? And so what we're arguing is the following. Cursing a parent and other such offenses are so horrible that they're deserving of death. However, the oral tradition, it doesn't tell us what we deserve. It is interested in practical halachic judicial process proclaims that that capital punishment, if ever, actually occurs. And this, by the way, there's no doubt that Israeli law has been influenced by Talmudic law. There's only one person who was put to death in Israel, and that, of course, was the Nazi Adolf Eichmann, who was hanged in 1962, going all the way back. No one else. Demjanjuk almost received it, but there was the slightest question about Demjanjuk on Treblinka, but I mean, it was known. There was clear evidence on Sobibor and other camps, and even Treblinka. It was, you know, in a court of American law, it was beyond a reasonable doubt. But in Israel, it's even beyond a reasonable doubt is not enough. It's just not enough. And that's why Israel, think about it. In Iran, I mean, they're executing people every day. Who knows how many people they're executing. And if one looks into the Zohar, I want to just bring this together. The Zohar actually says the following. The Zohar says, this is a mystical teaching, and it's appropriate because Lag BaOmer, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, many say is the writer of the Zohar. He calls the written law Dina Kashya, which means the harsh law. And the Talmudic law, he calls Dina Rafya, which means the soft law. That is to say, the written law is harsh. The oral law is soft. And the two combine and weave a beautiful tapestry, I write, as the written law cannot be understood without the oral law. And together they form one unit. The psalmist proclaims, Torat Hashem Tanima, the Torah of the Lord is whole, together, holy, holistic. And one last point, and then I want to open this up, because today's session is a session that deals with something specific, but humbly, it's a thought to think about more broadly. There are texts in our Torah that are very disturbing to me. I'm an Orthodox rabbi, as much as some people push back on me. I love the Torah, and I'm committed to the Torah. But there are texts that are very, very hard. With all the explanations of Amalek, I'm especially perturbed by the texts that talk about genocidal war. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 20. It's in the book of Numbers, our treatment of Midian. Go out, kill men, women, children. What is that? It's a tough text. But all I can say is the best I can do with this, and one person's understanding, and this is my understanding, but one person's understanding could be another person's rationalization. These texts should only be understood with the oral tradition nearby. And when the oral tradition finishes with the written text, it takes us literally, it cuts into it. And it says, of course, there is no genocidal war. First, second, and third, we have to seek out peace. And with all my heart and soul, I believe that those discussions led in the establishment of the state to the whole philosophy and it's in practice of the Israeli army of Toha Laneshek, of purity of arms. Very far cry from some of the texts in the written law. Our oral tradition is a very sophisticated tradition. I'm learning the Daf Yomi now. It's challenging. It's multi. This is the first time I'm trying to finish the whole Talmud. I pray I'm given the health and the years to do so. And I'm sorry I didn't do it before, but I must say I was preoccupied with other things. It's a very developed tradition, and I'm one who really believes that there is no nation on the face of the earth that is surrounded by the kind of enemy that Israel is surrounded with. It used to be Egypt and Lebanon and Syria and Jordan, and now it's Hamas and Hezbollah and Al-Qaeda and Islamic Jihad, and Iran's right off there, and Syria, surrounded by such enemies. I mean, we're not surrounded by Canada. That's not our neighbor. We're not surrounded by Mexico. That's not what we're surrounded by. We're surrounded by enemies bent on our destruction. And given all that, I heard this first from Alan Dershowitz. I think he's right. I think there's hardly, if any, army that carries itself with the moral, ethical sense that the Israeli army does. That doesn't mean that there aren't aberrations. I saw a video of, this is not the army, but of young Jewish men beating up a Druzi near the Meron. It takes my heart away to see that. It's so misguided. It breaks my heart. That's not what we're about. And I would radically say, maybe this is radical, we have tough texts in our 5 books of Moses. And so does the Quran. The Quran has very tough text. It has texts that are really harsh, aggressive, warlike. But the difference between us, I believe, now not a scholar in Islam, but I don't believe from what I have read that their oral tradition is anywhere as developed as our oral tradition is. Maybe one day it will be developed. I don't know. But it's often the case that what you read in the Quran is what you get. Not so in our Torah. What we read is not what we get. We are not written law Jews alone. That's the Karaites. That's the Samaritans. That's not who we are. As much as there are those who beat up on the Pharisees, we are a rabbinic tradition. And as a matter of fact, today, I think it has to be a rabbinic tradition, which is very, very influenced and impacted by the Yamcha. I think it's not just the rabbis, it's the people, the Amcha, who also can contribute to an understanding of the law. We see this, that's for another discussion. For me, the law as it develops is not hierarchical. It doesn't only come from the rabbis down. No, and it's not that the rabbis are up and lay women are down. It's a combination between the two. For example, when I think about the Agunah issue, and I think about whatever progress has been made, it's not been enough. Where did that progress come from? It didn't come from the rabbis. It came from the people. It came from the Blue Greenbergs of this world, frankly, who stood up and said, this can't be what the Torah meant. It can't be that women are going to be chained in an unwanted marriage. It can't be. And they pushed and pushed. And in fact, the truth of the matter is, when you're in a different reality, part of our oral tradition is there's a way. There's a way. Blue used to say, if there's rabbinic will, there's a halachic way. There's a lot of truth to that. A lot of truth to it. This week we're reading about the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year, and we're reading about how, in the sabbatical year, the Jubilee year, monies and properties are supposed to be returned. How do you deal with that? And the rabbis found a way through Pruzbul or whatever it is. That's the way Jewish law evolves. B'kitzur, in short, eye for an eye, that's not the law. That's what the person deserves. That's the teaching. That's the way the Bible wants to say. It's a terrible thing to do that. When it comes down to it, I've got to look into the oral tradition. And the oral tradition says that's never the way it was. We don't gruesomely take out an eye for an eye. That's not what we are about. The written law is the harsh law, says the Zohar. The oral law, the practical law, is the soft law. And it's through a very delicate combination that the Torah is whole. I'll stop here, and I want to get everybody's input on this by all means.
So I see Tova's hand is up. Can I see any other hands? I see Jesse. Is that Jesse? Yeah, okay. So let's start with Tova and then Jesse, and then we'll see who else has a comment. Tova, go ahead.
Well, first of all, you just mentioned the Aguna. So I just want to say I'm in the midst of reading Chaim Grada's The Aguna, and I highly recommend it. And I'm afraid my view is much more simplistic than yours, Rabbi. Because I think that we read the Torah all the time. Every year we go over the same parshiot. Why? Because every year we learn the Torah in our time, where we are now. And so I think an eye for an eye, I think speaks about equal deficiency, equal compensation, because when we say tachat ayin, I think that means the equivalent. And
Yes.
so in different times, that equivalent is different. So if you lose the sight of an eye, maybe in these days, it's bad, but not what it was. And when we talk about the death penalty, if I'm not mistaken, I think the Torah only gives us two ways for the death penalty. And one of them is skila, stoning. And that involves the whole community. So even in the Torah, you have to have everybody willing to kill this person.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's a different, that's maybe a little different way of looking at it.
Yeah. Thank you, Tova. Thank you so much. But I see Arnie is on and not lying on a pillow, but actually sitting up. So I like that. Hi, Arnie. How are you feeling, Arnie?
Arnie, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm doing a lot better, and thank God I'm going home today. So after 2 months, I'm going back to the real world.
It's wonderful.
Mazel tov.
Oh, Mazel tov is right. And now I have 2.5 weeks to get ready for my son's wedding. I have to get a suit. I don't think my high school suit will fit anymore.
That's wonderful. So such wonderful, wonderful celebration awaits you, Arnie. You deserve only happiness.
Thank you.
Yimalei Adonai kol mishalot libecha. Wonderful.
I don't want all the attention.
I'll move it over to Jesse, who wanted to make a comment, but I'm glad to see you, Arnie.
Thank you, Shirley.
Well, a couple of comments. One, I'm glad.
Hey, Jesse, how are you doing?
Baruch Hashem, very well, very well. Having a great time.
Wow. When are you going back, Jess?
Thursday night. Who knows?
And we're going before Shavuot. We're going back for another 2 months. So maybe we can connect. I'd love that.
I would love to. Here before Thursday or there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very excited to hear that you're doing the Daf Yomi now. I'm also 3.5 years in. And,
wow.
And it's, I thought I'm getting a little old to start 3.5 years ago, but if you started together, so that means that helps encourage me, that not too old to be doing it. And I've been at it every day, including today. It's all about
Jess, how do you do it, Jess?
Online.
But do you listen to anyone or?
Asher Lopatin.
Asher Lopatin gives the daf?
He is the main organizer and he's got 2 with him. Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Several thousand people, I think, are in that.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. I could send you the link.
If you could, I would be
gladly.
So appreciative. I would like to see that.
It's great. Today, it's all about gratitude and
and about flattery.
Flattery. Yes.
Flattery, and
right.
That's complicated.
You
want to encourage people, and
so I don't want to flatter you that you're doing the Daf Yomi, but I'm encouraged that you are and that I am, and encourage everyone else to do that because there's really a lot to learn in it. I would reflect the issue that you brought up right at the beginning in terms of Christian versus Jewish reading of what happened in terms of the development of the people. And I would say that the Talmud really develops at the same time as Christianity. And the ideas are very much in parallel. So that where Talmud is rafa, or is softer or more loving or more accepting or more inclusive. It develops at the same time as Christianity and pretty much in parallel. So we go from the harsher or the harder law, or of course, it's much shorter, the Bible, the 5 books. So it gives you just kind of a hint and a start on things, and then the Talmud develops them. And Islam, while it comes even 600 years later, also develops much of it at the same pace. And I think the important thing about that development and that transition from harsher law to much more explanation, including what I see as frequently pretty much a reversal of positions. Ayin tachat ayin being a great example, that you pretty much reverse in a simple way, and in a very, I think it takes some acrobatics to reverse it, but I think it's developing. I think that means that it's very important that we continue to develop. I think that's the very important message, that Judaism can't stand still. It has to keep developing, as Tova said before me, in keeping with what we have learned and with the times and with the situation. And when we have a better situation, God willing, so it will be more peaceful. There'll be less about these laws and these military situations. God willing, we'll get there. But I think it's very important that we continue to develop and not say ala chapsuka and it's all done, but continue to develop and to progress and to become more humane and more in Darchei Ha'el, more in the way of God than we have been until now.
I couldn't agree with you, Jess. That was said so beautifully. And, the holiday of Shavuot, which is generally understood historically as a holiday of receiving the Torah. In the Torah, Jess, as you know, never ever does the Torah say that this was the day when the Torah was given.
Right.
And maybe it doesn't say it because if it did, it would imply it was given when in fact it's being given every day. Every day, what we're doing is a process of the Torah being given. And that's why when we come to the Torah, men and women, we say the bracha, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech olam, bless you, God, asher bacha banu mikol ha'amim, you treasure us, v'natan lanu et Torato, you gave us the Torah. Now, the key of a blessing is the seal, Jess. The seal is the summary. And in the summary, we say, Baruch atah Adonai. The next 2 words, anyone? Notain Torah. Now, what is notain? Notain is in the present tense.
Yes.
There's a movement. Notain Torah. What do you mean God is still giving the Torah? Well, it's still being given.
And we're still receiving it.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. And my challenge is, as an Orthodox rabbi, how do I remain true to that and yet believing in, this is really a very, this is what I'm sharing with you is I don't know if it's a common teaching in the Orthodox world, but that's what the Bayit's about, and Chovevei and Marat, and yeah.
We don't have to strive to be common, do we?
Yeah. I see that Robert is on who's raised in investments $1 billion or something like that for Israel. What's $1 billion?
I have a question for you. So based on what you said, first of all, I became a grandfather last week.
Oh, Mazel Tov.
His name is Ami Tzion. You would like that.
I love that.
Born on Shoah, and the bris was Erev Yom Ha'atzmaut.
Wow.
Father, obviously, he didn't know, was Abraham and was a Holocaust survivor. So somehow he came up with the Ami Tzion.
Beautiful.
So anyways, 2 weeks old, new news. So based on what you said, it would seem based on what you said about ayin tachas ayin, it would seem to me that if any attorney wanted to defend someone who got attacked, I may be not understanding you completely, and wanted to use that ayin tachas ayin, that's really not a good defense based on what you said this morning.
Yeah, what would be the defense, Robert?
An eye for an eye. You killed my son, I'm going to kill you.
Yeah.
That's why I killed you instead of just stunning you when you came to rob my house. So it's not a good defense.
For physical compensation, it's an incorrect. There's unanimity. There's not even a divergence of opinion. I have seen, I'm sorry I don't have it in front of me, but it's quite something. I have seen in the writings of Rabbi Soloveitchik, my teacher, he wrote a book in 1956 called Kol Dodi Do Fake. It's sometimes translated Fate and Destiny. Right. And it's a book about theodicy. It's 11 years after the Shoah. And he has many glorious ideas that he mentions there. But he says that the establishment of the state of Israel is it's a manifestation. It shows how God is knocking at our door saying, this is a moment of potential redemption. And he tries to identify how we have, with the establishment of the state, we've come to a new era. And he does something which is so un-Soloveitchik-like. And he says, this is not me, this is Rabbi Soloveitchik. I wish I had it in front of me. It's in Kol Dodi Do Fake. I actually quoted, Shuli, a little snip of it in Loving Torah in Beshalach, Parshat Shmot. It was the piece, I think it was on the Shirah, the song of Moshe and Miriam. But he says, there was a time when we would be beat up and we couldn't respond. And he goes into a long harangue and he says, now they know if they're going to beat up on us, there's going to be a physical defense. That we have an we have an IDF, that there's going to be a response. And he says, maybe today we have eye for an eye, and he uses the word mamish. Really? It's like when you're reading it, like, what is, this was 1956. This was 10 years after the Shoah. I don't know what he would say today.
I think you quoted him saying Jewish blood is not free for taking.
Yes.
It's not Hefker.
Right, he said that. Dam Yehudi Eino Hefker. Today, with the establishment of the state, it's become clear that Jewish blood is not cheap. That
was one of your slogans always, you and Glenn.
That was our slogan.
Many times.
When we thought we knew something, yes.
Right. You succeeded a lot. Don't belittle yourself.
Okay. Do you have a quote there, Shuli, from the Rav?
That was the only part of the quote from him.
What does it say?
Well, the paragraph says, in 1956, Rabbi Yosef Dov Soloveitchik wrote that with the establishment of the State of Israel, God suddenly manifested himself. One such manifestation was that Jewish blood is not free for the taking, is not Hefker. During the Shoah, Jewish life for most of the world was worthless. It was reported that at times Jews were not even gassed before being incinerated as the cost was too high. And what was that cost? Rabbi Yitz Greenberg asks. It was a fraction of a penny. Even in death, we were considered to be worth nothing. With the establishment of the state, Rabbi Soloveitchik declared that one could sense God's presence in the Jews would be protected. No one would be able to spill blood in Israel without a strong response.
Well, and he says it in his own words, but I want to go over what Yitz wrote, my dear friend Yitz, who, by the way, maybe today he's turning 90, taught the great Rabbi Greenberg. I met him for the first time. I don't know if you know the history. He invited me to the Riverdale Jewish Center when he was the rabbi to be the assistant.
Rabbi, next week, May 16th.
That's his
It's
birthday?
his birthday.
Oh, thank you. We got to have a birthday party for you. So he invited me in 1971. So you can figure out how old he was. He was a very young man. And I just, this is anecdotal. So I came, did the Shabbat, and he always says, he tells this story, that his plan was that I would become his assistant. And then he wanted to leave because he was going to head the Judaic department at City College. And I would become the rabbi of the RJC, of the Riverdale Jewish Center. That was his plan. And so in the end, I took this position. Maurice Lamb had suggested it to me. And what did we have? We had a boiler room. That's all we had, full with asbestos. And I remember Yitz called me. He's a dear, dear friend. And I come over there and he says to me, what are you doing? You're taking a shul in a boiler room? You could have become the rabbi of the Riverdale Jewish Center. And I looked at him, I said, Yitz, how long would I last in the Riverdale Jewish Center? A month or a week? How long? You know, it's just not going to work. Anyways, that's just a sweet little anecdote. True story. One last comment from someone, anyone?
Our Beverly and Ted.
Oh, I want to say that what Yitz said was, and he deserves so much credit for, you know, Elie Wiesel, of course, is identified as almost like the Rebbe of the Shoah, but Yitz had a lot to do with that. They were really partners. Yitz deserves a lot of credit. But what he discovered was that there were times where the Nazis, Yimach Shemam, would gas, and then after Jews were gassed and dead, then incinerated. So he discovered that there were times when they ran out of gas. They just didn't have enough gas. And so what did they do? They actually burnt Jews alive. And he did a calculation of how much it would cost to gas a human being. It's quite something. Because they weren't using gas because the Nazis said it's too expensive. And as it turned out, he writes about this. According to his calculation, it's less than a half a penny. And he writes, we weren't even in death worth a half a penny. And that's what we were alluding to. Then during the Shoah, our lives were worthless. Now it counts. And yeah. One more comment and we'll stop. Is Ezra on?
Not yet.
Anybody? One last comment?
Ted and Beverly okay? I don't see them, just their son. Are they okay?
Yeah, they're well, thank you. Both okay, both kind of in the middle of something now, so not on the...
Just remind me, at Rambam, there was someone who was, I think, maybe second in command, who had been in Riverdale at the Bayit.
Yeah, Shraga Blazer, Professor Shraga Blazer was at Montefiore for a while with you. I think you're thinking of him.
Yes.
Yeah, he is now editor of the Rambam Maimonides Medical Journal, which is an open access journal for Rambam. It's gotten lots of good international repute. It's free for anyone, open access, under its code RMNJ for Rambam Maimonides Medical Journal. And it's the journal of the Rambam Medical Center in Haifa. So he's still involved in that to this day, but he's no longer doing pediatric intensive care, which he did when he was at Montefiore and when he was at HIR.
And his last name is Plaza, P as in Peter?
No, B-L-A-S-E-R. Shraga Blazer.
And he lives in Haifa?
Yes. Yeah, good guy.
Yeah?
Good guy.
Yeah.
He passed the pediatrics on. And you might not recognize Rambam if you make it to Haifa. It has grown building after building, thank God, and project after project. And
I was so impressed with Rambam, and I want to close with a Jesse story that there are different moments when I was with Dr. Jesse Lapter at Rambam, and I just remember one particular moment when I don't know whether it was in one of when Haifa was being bombed, and what I remember was going into visiting a patient and walking in, and here you are, you're a wonderful doctor, but I saw you pastorally, the way do you remember that, Jess? You really were.
Sure.
You were so,
well, I remember.
Not all doctors can do that. You were so connecting and understanding of this particular patient. And
I brought you to some patients who couldn't speak, and you sang, and it was.
Yes. But you were there. You were there too, and
yes.
Yeah.
War is hell.
Rabbi, I want to ask you a question. Rabbi.
Yes.
10 days ago, last Friday, Friday before last Friday, you said you were going to leave and stay in Eretz Israel. I wish you could sustain here in Riverdale. You said you want to leave. You want to leave in a couple more weeks and you have to go to Israel. I wish you could stay in the United States, in Riverdale.
Thank you.
Is that true?
Yeah. I love Israel. So,
you want to leave here and go to Israel forever?
I'd like to, but Riverdale's a beautiful community. So you're in the right community with Rav Ezra, Rav Stephen.
You're here.
Yeah, thank you. Ezra, how are we doing?
You going to leave here? Is that true? You going to leave here?
Okay, how are you, Ravi? Thank God.
Ezra, let's connect today, Ezra.
Okay.
Ezra, I want everybody to read what you wrote about Lag BaOmer. That was a big word you used there. Lacko what?
Lacrimose. It's
wait a minute. Lacrimose.
It's
teary, right?
It's a
You going to leave it here and go to Israel forever?
It's a term used by Salo Baron. One second, Stuart. It's a term used by Salo Baron, the great professor from Columbia. And when he was writing his history of the Jews, he said, until now, all histories of Jews have embodied the lachrymose view of Jewish history, that it's all suffering and pitiable and pogroms and murders, and in doing so, you miss all the joy and celebration and achievements and flourishing of the Jewish world.
Absolutely. Love you guys.
Are you going to stay here or stay in Israel? That's what I want to know. Is that true?
We're going for a few months now. We'll be back, God willing, for Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, and come back. Okay, as long as you come back. We need you. That's why. Trust me, we need you.
I see Karen's on, Graham's on. It's great. Just great to see you all. Love you guys all. Great to see you.
Okay,
all right.
Jesse. Alei Vatzlach, Jess. Love you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I will begin in a few minutes. Give everyone a time to reset a little bit or step out if they have to. Or want to.